So you want to stop your sessions? Well, no, you can't. Who's going to pay my bills if you stop seeing me? This is perhaps the caricature of what people fear or claim about therapists and their motives, which are merely to string along the client for as long as possible, to extract as much money out of them as possible. That is perhaps the topic for another day, but to get to the question, first of all, you don't need a reason to stop doing therapy. Now, the caveat to that is that although you can stop at any time, it is recommended that you do so in collaboration with your therapist, and we can talk about the reasons for that. But it's not an obligation, and if you're inclined, you can just ghost if you want. It's up to you. Now, often that happens, people just vanishing. If it's very early on, they've maybe just done 1 or 2 sessions. A strong relationship between the two of you has not really been established, and maybe you're still just shopping around, and so you don't feel a strong obligation to really explain why you've decided not to continue, which again, you're free to do. It's not a problem, and the modal number of sessions is 1. We're kind of used to this. It's like most, if not all, services. There's a heavy drop-off at the beginning, and just think of things like the gym. A lot of people sign up at the beginning of the year, and there's far fewer at the end of the year. It's this big drop-off. Same with therapy. So we're not going to be offended if that's the route you take, but obviously, again, feedback is to be welcomed, ideally. So that's the first thing. Now, the main, more interesting, perhaps, phenomenon to go over here is if you have done a bunch of therapy, you've established some sort of relationship with the therapist, continuity over a particular period of time, and now you feel ready to stop. You feel like you maybe achieved what you wanted to, or you've made some changes that you're happy with. But there's this aversion to bringing up the topic of termination. Why is that? Perhaps you're fearful of how the therapist might react, that they may be upset or take it personally, infer that you're saying that they've done a bad job, or you don't like them, things like this. Now, if that's your way of thinking that's preventing you from bringing this up, unfortunately, you might not have done as much meaningful therapy as you thought. Because what are you doing in essence? Well, you're prioritizing the imagined preferences of another person over your own. Why are you doing that? If that is what's happening, it's unlikely that that's limited just to the therapeutic relationship, and it potentially indicates something about your relationships as a whole. So the idea that you would have done a bunch of therapy and not hit upon that, and for the therapist to have not noticed that, is kind of concerning, potentially a problem. Because if there is something there, and it's not been hit on, and it's just been allowed to replicate within the therapy unchallenged, then we're not really doing therapy. Because if all therapy is a replication, a reenactment of patterns of behavior that you enact outside the therapy, then all we're doing is reinforcing those existing habits, which odds are some of which you don't like, because that's why you're here, to change something. That's what the purpose of therapy is, to change something in yourself. So if there's an aversion to something like this, that's potentially a problem, and either there's an issue within the relationship and that you might be better off in a different therapeutic relationship, or if you do bring it up, that it can be resolved and some more meaningful progress can be made before you decide to actually terminate. So there's an opportunity there. It's just a matter of whether you want to take advantage of it. There's a psychologist, Jonathan Shedler, and you can find him on X. I think he has a Substack as well. And he has this useful little equation for figuring out if you're doing therapy or not. To paraphrase, he says, if you go to therapy and during your sessions at some point, the therapist says something that you don't like or that bothers you or that you feel angry about afterwards, and then in the next session, you go back and you don't mention it, then you're not doing therapy. Now, if you go back and you do bring it up, you might be doing therapy. So that's the basic equation. Therapy, as we've talked about several times before, is a relationship. And so it's not to say that you're just obligated to be an open book 100% of the time and full transparency from the get-go. Again, that trust takes time to build, but if a significant amount of therapy has been done and we're still in this self-censorship pattern, and we're concealing things that are important, that there's an opportunity there to work on and to explore, then you're just limiting what you can get out of it. And the therapist only knows what you tell them. Now, again, hopefully with experience, they can potentially pick up on things even if you don't bring them up, but that's not always the case. And some therapists may be inclined to allow you space and room to divulge that kind of thing yourself before they hit upon it. So that's just something to keep in mind. If that does apply to you, then again, unfortunately, you might not have made as much meaningful progress as you thought. So this is maybe something to look at, either with that therapist, or if you're really uncomfortable bringing it up with them, to maybe bring it to a new therapist. All right. So beyond that, as mentioned before, you can stop for any reason. It's not an obligation, and we never want you to feel like you're obligated to come. And everything I'm saying is within the context of a voluntary therapeutic arrangement. We're not talking about a situation where a psychiatrist has coerced you into doing it, or law enforcement has compelled you to do it. Those are separate issues. So you're free to stop at any time, but if you have done some meaningful therapy and you do feel you're ready to stop because you've achieved what you wanted to, then there should be no issue bringing it up, and the therapist should welcome that kind of conversation. And to be honest, it can be a periodic thing. It doesn't have to be something that you're 100% certain of doing to bring it up. Often it is useful just periodically to just check in to see, okay, do you feel we're focusing on the right things, we're using the time in the best way possible? Are there any refinements we can make? And it's those tweaks that can help us just maximize what we're trying to do. And if we're not, well, again, we need to make some changes there. Or if it's really problematic, then the fit may just not be right and you need to try someone else. So if you have that kind of conversation, with the therapist, you can talk about just a complete termination, and before that happens, you can recap and re-explore some of the things that you got out of it, and just highlight what you know now or are capable of now that you weren't before, just as a refresher. And you may also talk about some things that you're still hoping to improve upon, because this is another thing to point out, that the idea that you have to have no more problems to solve to stop therapy is kind of a fantasy. It's obviously unreasonable. So that's not a prerequisite. There's always going to be challenges that we face. It's just a matter of, do you feel in a place where you're now equipped with enough tools and enough self-awareness to be able to rise to the occasion when those new challenges arise? So that's another thing. Now, if you're maybe not fully confident and you want to maybe experiment with rather than a clean termination, a kind of tapering, where you just increase the duration, the gap between each session. That's another way of potentially just getting a sense of how you're doing and whether you're getting closer to not needing the therapist anymore, which should be the goal of the therapist, to make themselves obsolete to you, to be no longer necessary to you, because you have enough, again, self-understanding to not have to lean on this other person. So if you want to do the tapering thing, that's fine. You can, if you're doing a weekly session, you could maybe extend it to every 2 weeks and then every month and see how you do. If you feel fine those longer periods, then maybe you're ready to stop. One thing to note, if you do decide to do these longer gaps in between sessions, there is a risk that when you do meet again, that there's a lot of stuff to get through, because there's just more time has passed, more things potentially to happen. And it potentially results in the therapy becoming more of a sort of news dump and more of a info dump about what's happened. And there's maybe less time left over to zoom in and dig into the deeper stuff. So that's maybe just something to be aware of. It can become a more surface level enterprise. But if you've already done that deep stuff and you're just making these minor tweaks, just checking that things are proceeding as planned, it maybe is not such an issue, and it's temporary in that we're moving toward just complete termination anyway. Okay, I think that's basically everything. Maybe the one other thing to mention is that, let's say you just want to stop, and you don't want to just ghost, but you want to stop not because you feel like you've achieved something, but because you just don't like the therapist or don't like their approach. Well, that's admirable to want to actually explain that to them rather than just disappear, which you're free to do. But hopefully any therapist that is in that situation will welcome that feedback, because ideally it's going to make them better. If they take it on board and you have some legitimate concerns or complaints, or if it is just a mismatch, which happens. Not every therapist and client are the right fit, even if the therapist is perfectly capable and good at doing what they're doing. But there are just some incompatibilities. Sometimes it could be an age thing. If you're different generations, that can just make things more challenging. And there are other reasons why, again, not for lack of their quality or qualifications, etc. You'd be better off, there's a better fit out there for you. So again, a therapist should welcome that kind of feedback, and hopefully it makes them better in some way. It's useful to maybe have some things pointed out to them that they weren't aware of before. So that's fine. Feel free to do that. Okay, let's leave it there. and hopefully that has helped you. If you're in therapy right now, or if you're planning to do it, maybe puts you at ease if you do get into this situation in the future. Thanks.